Hey entrepreneurs, is there a doctor in the house? We got Dr. T, Toby Travis, on today's episode. And his mission in life is to help others find mission fulfillment and well-being for themselves. And those are two separate things that we talk about on this podcast. He has a concept that he wrote a book about called Trust Ed. He breaks down the components of a bridge and relates them with the components of trust in just a brilliant way that John and I have not heard before. We talk about everything from transparency to authenticity to relationships and how to evaluate trust. One of the things he doubles down on at the end of the episode is, looking forward to you hearing that at the end of the episode. Dr. Travis, we are happy to have you on Entrepreneurs United today, as we were just chatting just a little bit, and being an entrepreneur yourself and just looking on LinkedIn, you have so many experiences. We're happy to dig into some of those with you today. If you wouldn't mind kicking us off with, what are you doing today, and maybe just very briefly, why?
Well, thank you, first of all, Rich. Great to be here. What I'm doing today is kind of what I've done all my life. I'm wearing multiple hats. So kind of my full-time day job is I'm a superintendent of a private school in North Carolina. And so that's kind of the full-time endeavor. And then I also work and serve as a consultant, as an executive coach, as a mentor to both school and organizational leaders, literally around the world. I've had the opportunity of connecting with some amazing people in some distant and faraway lands. I actually really have a passion for helping those in distressed and developing areas. That's been kind of a niche or a niche of mine for a number of years. So I currently have clients in places like Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Just wrapped up on a contract with a group in Vietnam, and so it's not just North American focused or based. And then I also do trainings, provide professional development for schools and organizations, specifically on how to increase their level of trust. And so it's really, it's about how do we increase a better work environment that also produces higher and better results to what we do. So kind of, my mission in life is to help others find mission fulfillment and well-being at the same time. So it's not just about producing results, it's producing results and supporting people well. And what we find is, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is the better the work climate, the higher the production of what comes out of it. And we've seen that through the research and practice, and anecdotally, I've seen it time and time again. When employees are happy, well supported, protected, they get motivated, they innovate, they produce more. And so that's kind of the work that I'm in, is helping others discover how to do that better. So that probably wasn't short or brief, but that's kind of what helpful. I'm currently doing.
Yeah, thanks for the context. And your mission being to help others find mission fulfillment and well-being themselves. Can we dig into that just a little bit more on, for how long has that been your mission, and how did you come to realize what your life mission was? I'll preface that with, I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs or just individuals out in the world that kind of wonder what is their mission. So that's why I'm curious to dig into a touch of your story on how long have you known that's been your mission, and a little bit more on that.
That's a really good question. Articulating that concept or that mission statement, personal mission statement of helping others reach their mission fulfillment and well-being is relatively recent. The last few years, I think, coming to that articulation. But the understanding of why that's so important really goes back decades. I think when I was a young entrepreneur and starting businesses in my late 20s and early 30s, and realizing very quickly life's about relationships. Successful work and in development of our careers, our business, whatever our ambitions are. It's really about relationships. And so having that understanding that when we help others succeed, we succeed. And I think, again, I don't know that I could put a date on it, Rich. I don't think I could say, yeah, I had this flash moment in 1987.
Sure.
You develop, but I would say go back to that realization and some mentoring that I had from others who invested in me. And I think that also was an influence of understanding. Now I get the relationships right, and then really good things start happening.
Well, here might be another access point. What's the earliest memory you have in your life of when you felt fulfilled to be part of someone else's journey of fulfillment?
Well, as I mentioned you before we went on the recording, I actually started out in the entertainment world years ago. So I was a young aspiring actor and singer and even a magician. I actually produced a touring illusion show for a number of years. But I've always been involved in education and mentoring. So even in those years, others would reach out to me to assess their show. I had created something called show mapping, which was a way to basically analyze shows and performances and to help performers with routining their shows. And so that just, I got so much fulfillment out of going in and helping somebody else develop their craft. And also what I discovered, the more I helped others, the better I got. And then as I moved into the education sector years later, I started to be invited into what are called accreditation visits. And so I would be assigned to these teams to go onto a school campus and assess basically schools in a accreditation process. They do a self-study, they put out this report, and the visit team, the review team, our job is to make sure, is that report real and true? And as you spend days on a campus and interact with people, I realized by helping others and assessing others, I was assessing myself, and my own practice just got better and better and better. And so I think that that understanding of I'm fulfilled by helping others succeed really started back in those early days of my entertainment career.
Yeah, and you've been able to kind of build and spin out a legacy for yourself wrapped around working with and helping others be fulfilled, which is pretty cool. Um, you had mentioned you do trainings, and then right after that, you had mentioned on developing or increasing trust. Um, that's obviously it's an undebatably important component of business and of relationships. I'd love to hear from you. What are the most common ways you see that people erode trust?
Yeah.
What are some of the absolutely don't do's that you believe everybody should really be aware of? If you want to have a trusting relationship, don't do these couple of things.
So I have a new book out called Trusted, the Bridge to School Improvement. And I should say, use this analogy of a bridge that has 6 major components that have all to be connected together, or the bridge is not trustworthy. And it's a good illustration. It's like, you're not going to drive onto a bridge that's full of potholes, or, it doesn't have, railings. And same thing with trust. If we don't have certain elements there, trust does not exist. So for example, trust requires a trusted leader. It requires that they have well-articulated values and beliefs about whatever it is their business, their work is, their profession, their practices, the work culture they're trying to create. But that's the foundation of leadership. What do we believe about what we're doing together as an organization? What are our values for how we should do life and work together? Foundation of the bridge of trust. Substructure on a bridge is all about connecting and supporting everything of the bridge to the foundation of the bridge. But on leadership, that is the process of consistency of practice. And what I'm saying there is consistent protocols, policies that are consistent with what we say about who we are and how we believe our work should be. And that's probably the area where I see trust falls apart most frequently. Is a leader or a business owner will say, hey, employees are our greatest asset, right? So they are the essence of our company, our organization. But then policies and practices and procedures of what that owner is doing and involved in does not demonstrate that the employees are their greatest value. And they're making decisions that aren't asking the question first, how does this impact our employees? That's where trust erodes. Mm-hmm. And they're not demonstrating the substructure of trust, which is connecting everything that we do and supporting everything we do with our beliefs and our values.
Wow, that's great. I love the questions, Rich, that you're asking here. And so to paraphrase, in your Trust Ed book, which we'll talk about in a little bit, maybe we're talking about it now as well, is that the theory is this bridge, and that, much like you would if you're driving the car, right? That bridge is strong or not, and you have foundation and really the substructure. And what I think you're saying is that the foundation is me saying things. I put values and posters on the wall. I tell people what I'm all about, and it's lip service. Versus the substructure is, what do I actually do? Do I walk the walk?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And am I being consistent? And this isn't just my idea, by the way. This isn't just a good thinking. This is the research. This, and it's not just mine. I mean, there's a boatload of research that's out there on this. And what we've discovered, and what I'm articulating in the book, just so we can get our arms around it, is there are actually 6 distinct components of trusted leadership.
Okay.
Now, I work primarily in the education sector, so the book utilizes education leadership as the examples, but the principles are universal. And but correct, John. Those are the 2 starting points, if you will. You look into a company handbook or a school handbook, right? The employee manual, and often they'll have a mission statement, they'll have a vision statement, they'll even have articulated, here are company values. Mm-hmm. Those are really important statements, and especially in driving the improvement and the ongoing development of the organization. But where those statements really pay off, though, is in their consistency of practice.
Yep.
And is it authentic? And again, back to Rich's question, that's where trust most frequently falls apart.
Yeah, and I think the word authentic is massive there. I got a bunch of questions here to go on, but I want us to stick where you just ended. And I want to come back to the 6 principles of trusted leadership here in a second, because I think it's very important to capture. In terms of authenticity, what I've seen, whether it be with myself or with others that I'm witnessing, is most times the leader doesn't really recognize when they've stepped offline. But everybody else does. Yeah. But they don't have the heart or the courage to address it with the leader, because they're the leader. Who am I to go to the superintendent of the school and tell him he's off base? Like, I'm not going to do that to Dr. T. Like, So right. How can we help entrepreneurs be more cognizant of their behaviors when maybe sometimes they didn't mean to, but they stepped out of the consistency? They weren't as authentic as they say they are. How do you help leaders recognize that?
Well, one of the first steps to developing a higher level of trust between leadership and those whom they are leading is being vulnerable and being humble. I'm sure you're familiar with the work of Jim Collins. Jim Collins talks about the level 5 leader as being someone who is mission driven, passionate for the organization's mission. But that's also hitched to humility. And so the first thing I would counsel a leader is you need to be open to letting your employees assess you. and especially your direct reports. And so that's part of the work that we do. We actually do a 360 assessment where employees or direct reports are speaking directly about the trust level of their supervisor, and using that data to then drive and inform some action planning. How do we make this better? But the first point is just being willing to let others speak into your life. But what's interesting, just that action alone increases the level of trust. For me to say, as a school superintendent, to my principals and to my division heads, you know what, you're going to get this survey from a company, and it's anonymous. I won't know who's saying what, and you're going to be asked 48 questions about my leadership style and behaviors. Have at it. I need some data here to tell me how I'm doing. And that action alone is saying I am willing to look in the mirror. And if I may, often what we do, well, always, is we have a self-assessment tool, right? So as a leader, I do this self-assessment, and it gives me a score on these 6 components of trust. And then my employees assess me, with that 360.
What the gap is.
Yeah, exactly. And then right, you have this trust perception gap that's going on. But one of the things, guys, is in this area of development, perception is reality.
No question.
That's good.
Yeah. So, we might think and argue, no, I do this well. And no, when we're talking about leadership, no, perception is reality.
Quick question for you around authentic that John honed in on. I'd like to get your take on the difference between authentic and transparent, because I think there are some people that use those interchangeably.
Right.
In the English language, there really aren't 2 words that aren't nuanced in some way as being different. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 2 words for them. No. I think they're different, but if you asked me to articulate it, I don't think I'd do it very cleanly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the necessity for authenticity, yes, but then what is transparency, and how do those 2 coincide or not coincide?
That's a really good question. For me, authenticity is all about, are we consistently living out who we say we are? And are we demonstrating the values and beliefs that we articulate or have documented? That would be the authentic element. Transparency is tricky. I've heard, we need leadership to be more transparent. But if you've been in a leadership role, you can't always be transparent. And that it's not always healthy for the organization, for everybody to know everything. And so that gets a bit tricky. I think when people are crying for transparency, really what they're crying for is they don't want to get blindsided. They want to know, when a new initiative is coming your way, they want to have an opportunity to speak into it before it becomes the law of the land or becomes, the expected practice. To me, when I'm assessing organizations and I hear, the leadership's not transparent enough, and I say, well, give me an example of that. Almost always what they'll share with me is how they were blindsided. Some new practice, some new expectation, some new measure of assessing their work came out, and they had no opportunity to engage in the development of whatever that new practice or policy is. It just was laid on them. And then they feel like, wow, where did that come from? Why is leadership hiding that? So, that's probably one of the most frequent things I hear about transparency. And also is owners not being, or leaders not being transparent about their own failures, or about when an organization or a company is facing serious challenges. Let's say, you've taken some really serious financial hits, and you're thinking as a leader, I better not go too public with that, or that's going to create a bad narrative. Yeah. And I am a big believer in tell your own story, because if you don't tell your story, somebody else will. That's also a really important principle. But when we're talking about the relationship between leaders and their organization, people don't want to get blindsided with bad news about the economics of the organization. I mean, that you need to be transparent. And so that would be another area of transparency. They would say, yes, don't blindside your people. But also as leaders, when you've got personal issues going on with an employee that is affecting the company, but you need to have confidentiality. I mean, your office needs to be a safe zone for your employees. If I can, let me tell you a great story I was reminded of just the other day. So years ago, I was a high school principal, and I had a student came in. I think he was probably sophomore, junior, probably by that time. And I had a little couch sitting there in the office. And he comes into my office and he plops down on the couch. He lets out this big sigh. He goes, "Oh," and I said, "What's that about?" He goes, "This is the transparency room." I said, "The what?" He goes, "It's the transparency room." He says, "Dr. T, I can tell you anything." I tell you, that made my day.
Yeah.
And that's the same, just in that relationship I was trying to pursue with students. And I'm so thankful I had that relationship with that student. This is all the same relationship I want to have with my employees, and especially my direct reports. When they walk into my office, and especially when they walk into my office and they close the door behind them, this needs to be a safe environment, which means they know I am not going to be transparent about everything. Make sense?
Oh, big time. It's there's so many places to continue to go with this, and I love this conversation about why can a leader not always be transparent when their team wants them to be transparent, demands transparency from them. Is that really what they're asking for? Love that, because communication with your team is important.
Right.
Trust is coming back to being very important as well, and sometimes transparency puts you in that middle between trust and being communicative with your team. And the one thing you just said about safe, I want to come back all the way back to when you first started talking about increasing the level of trust in your organization. One of the things you said was people need to feel safe. It's not just about trusting the business. They want to feel like they're safe in their environment, right? They have their security measures met. So I really, really love that. Take us all the way back here, because there may be a few other areas we need to go, but I don't want to go too far until I really hear these 6 principles of trusted leadership. Right. I really need to hear these, because they may all come back full circle into these.
Well, again, if you picture a bridge, okay, so we've already talked foundation, substructure. Actually, we were really just talking about what I call the deck of trusted leadership. So the deck is that roadway, right? Well, what makes the deck of the bridge trustworthy to us is, well, we know our lane. It's very clear. We know where we're going, and we're in this lane. These are clear markings, and that's where we're heading. Well, that is the role of trusted leadership, is order and clarity. It's a lot about communication skills, so that would fall into that category as well. Other elements of a bridge, there are the bearings in a suspension bridge, especially. So these bearings, you might not even realize that they're there, but they're actually moving constantly. And what you see in the bearings of these major bridges is they are moving based on climate. In areas where there might be earthquakes, literally, as the foundation is rocking, payload. I mean, all kinds of. Here, the point is, in leadership, trusted leadership, the bearings of trusted leadership is flexibility.
Yeah.
And what we've also learned, though, is you cannot be flexible in a trustworthy way if you are also not involved. So we talk about leadership must be involved in the nuts and the bolts of the organization. I can't be a trusted and an effective leader sitting behind 3 doors of secretaries, right? Yeah. I've got to be in the meetings. I've got to be on the floor. I've got to be interacting with whomever the clientele might be. But that's the bearings of leadership: flexibility and involvement.
Okay.
A bridge has girders. So these are the beams that run underneath the bridge. These look different based on the bridge and the context of where the bridge is constructed. So if the bridge is on a corner, well, some of those girders are going to be longer than others, right? And they're going to be wider than others. And it's similar to the bearings idea of flexibility and involvement. Here, what we're talking about is adaptation and contextualizing. And what we've learned, you maybe have heard the expression, best practice must always be contextualized. It is so true. I'm a research guy, right? And I talk a lot about best practice, but I'll also be the first to say that when we see research-based best practices on leadership, we're talking about these are practices that have worked in most similar settings and come up with these results. But you must always contextualize the practice. Where we see a real struggle of this in the education sector is a district leader or board may well-intending to demonstrate equity for everyone. They'll implement a practice or a policy, and it's made at the district level, and then it falls apart for some reason. It's because they haven't processed and vetted it locally. And what I've learned in the education sector is every campus is different. And I see the same thing in the commercial world. So the bigger the business, the bigger and the more intentionally, rather, they have to be in ensuring decisions are being vetted and then contextualized to that local store, to that local outlet, because employees look different, customers look different, the culture and the environment around the organization looks different. In the school, parents look different, students and their needs look different, the teachers look different. So this is the girders of leadership, this idea of, no, we're going to contextualize this. And the last one is superstructure. At a bridge, that's what we see from the greatest distance away, right? It's the big, large element. Well, what's the big, large element in leadership? It's culture and relationships. And trusted leaders intentionally build positive culture. They intentionally develop relationships. I mentioned it earlier. We need to be tellers of the organizational story. And if we don't tell the story, if we're not intentional about it, somebody else is going to tell another story. And so here, it's this idea of intentionally developing a positive, healthy, trusted culture. And there's ways that we can do that. There's ways that we can assess it and do it. But there you go. And then the last piece that I talk about the book are the cables. And on a suspension bridge, you get all these suspension cables. Well, in leadership, those are those individual best practices. And this is what basically helps with the swaying and the movement and the interconnecting of all of it are the very specific practices that we do. And again, we've been able to identify exactly what those are so we can assess them and help others identify, hey, this is your strength. This we need to work on. Ooh, we're missing this. It can also be a real help in HR. When we're developing a profile, who do we need to hire here? Well, we're missing somebody who's really got this skill set. And so that's really valuable because leadership is all about teamwork. It's not about having, remember, the Lee Iacocca story, right? You think this charismatic leader is going to come in and fix it all. Well, it works for a short amount of time. But if you don't invest in a leadership team, and again, back to the bridge, no individual leader can have all these skill sets, right? It's just not possible, right? In schools, we talk about there are 21 responsibilities that principals must have competency in, and I've never met a principal who is competent in all 21.
Exactly.
So what does it mean? He or she needs to lead and develop a team that then can do this well. And so there you go. There's the bridge analogy. And
I love it. Maybe, you've had a lot of different phases of your careers, right? From being a touring illusion show to an entrepreneur and startups to schools and everything else. Are you sure you're not an engineer? Because you seem to understand bridges pretty well. So let me make sure I got them though. There's the lane, there's the bearings, there's the girders or beams, and then I got cables, but I feel like I'm missing two in between.
Right. So foundation,
okay.
Values and beliefs, substructure,
gotcha,
which is connect and support, bearings, flexible and involved, girders, contextualize and adapt, superstructure, culture and relationships, and the deck, order and clarity. And connecting those all together are the suspension cables of best practices of leadership.
Love it.
And I'm sorry if I'm sounding like I'm teaching a seminar.
No, this is awesome.
I always like to give full credit, John. When I came out of the doctoral program, and you're looking at how do you communicate all of this? It really was my wife's idea. We were sitting at the table one night, and I'm like, okay, I need a visual to communicate this. And she goes, well, sweetie, isn't it really just like a bridge? And I'm like, bing, 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 bing. I was like, great idea. And went back and looked at the research. And it's like, that fits here, that fits here. And so to your point, I actually did go back and spend about 3 months studying bridge construction and architecture. I am not an architect.
That's awesome.
But I know more about bridges than I ever knew before getting ready to write this book.
What's on either side of the bridge? Like I'm making the assumption it's bridging one person to another.
No. It's a bridge from where we are as an organization to where we want to be.
Got it.
So how do we as leaders effectively get over, and I think in the book I use a number of different illustrations. What's that river? The river are all the potential problems, right? All the things, all the hurdles the organization has to get over to get, so we set improvement goals. Where do we want to be as an organization? How do we get there? And what is leadership's role in getting us there? It's to build a bridge over all of these potential hazards. And, some people, there's all kinds of different approaches of leadership. There's the individuals who, again, they're the solopreneurs that want to just do it all themselves, and they roll up their sleeves, or they strip down, if you will, and they dive into the river to swim across, and they end up getting overwhelmed, right? There's the others who try to build a little raft and take a few over with them, but they really don't have what it's going to take to get large groups of people across. So there's all kinds of illustrations we could use, but it's that idea of getting us from where we are to where we want to be.
Thank you for that. I've got a question on the bearings. The way that you described the bearings, and I took notes, and they may not be complete, but it was they're moving based on the climate and the load, and it was about flexibility, and included in that is a need to be involved in the nuts and bolts. In my experience, that hasn't been an issue for entrepreneurs that I work with, is being involved. The issue is being over-involved. The issue is not being able to step away from it. And I'd love to get your take on, where's the balance point of that in the bearings part of the analogy, to go, how do you know if you're involved enough versus you're doing some micromanaging and you're over involved and you're not actually trusting your people?
Yeah, no, that's really good, Rich. I think of some of the best counsel I had when I came into my first role as a principal, and one of my mentors said to me, Toby, you're going to be overwhelmed. What you're going to find is there's just so much that's coming across your desk. So there's a question you need to ask every day and maybe every hour. And that is, does the principal need to do this? And if the answer is no, then you better find somebody else to do it, because only you can do what the principal's doing. Today, I'm a superintendent. Same thing holds true. It's like something comes to my desk or comes to my email. I have to look and I have to say, okay, is this something the superintendent needs to do? Because there's only one superintendent in this school, right? And if I don't do what the superintendent needs to be doing, then it's not going to get done. So I would say, Rich, it comes back to clarity of roles and trusting your people, right? And so, that CEO, that business owner, they need to be very clear on, okay, what is my role? Why did I hire these other individuals? And am I empowering to do what they should do? Because you're right, that will destroy trust. If I hire an individual and then I try to do their job, all that's going to build is resentment, right? And it goes back to that old principle: hire well, support well. Here's another piece of that. So some of the work that I do with organizations is we'll pull out their employee manual. I'm going to say, I want you to go through this manual of policies and identify every policy that is or has been developed because of a lack of trust of employees. How many procedures do you have in place are there because you don't trust your employees to do the right thing? And that's an eye-opening exercise. And then it comes back to, well, why are those policies there? And it's usually because one or two individuals, were really the wrong hires. And you ended up changing your corporate culture because of the blunders of a couple of individuals. You probably should have just let them find their happiness somewhere else. So, have you hired the right people? If you hire the right people, you don't need all these structures in place for accountability. They're going to be fully engaged into their job. And if they're not, let them go. And I'm sure you're probably familiar with the book, The Trust Edge by David Horsager. It was #1 in the Wall Street Journal. David does great work, and I've known David for years. And one of the things that he talks about is how there's data that shows how companies are far more profitable when there are trusted environments, because you're not spending as much money on systems and protocols to ensure accountability. And it comes back to, again, I'm kind of taking you around the corner there, but back to your question, it's what's my role as the owner, as the founder, and am I staying in my lane and allowing others that I'm bringing on to do their jobs? So it comes back to that self-reflection piece constantly.
And it almost comes back, I'm hearing a little bit of that, as it almost comes back to defining the deck on what is in my lane, but included in that is also being very clear about what's in your lane. And
yes, right.
And being involved to the extent that I am helping you work in your lane, I'm not overtaking your lane. So within the context of your analogy, I think that's some of what I'm hearing.
Right, and let me get right down to maybe kind of a takeaway for folks. So, what's a specific practice? I mean, we're talking a lot of philosophy and theory here. How do you actually do things to make this work better? So, a practice that I do, and actually I'm thinking of it because I just wrapped up the mid-year round of this. At the beginning of every year, and so in the school world, of course, that would be the academic year, but annually at the beginning of the year, whatever that looks like for you, I meet with every direct report one-on-one, and we review their job description. And here's an opportunity for us to identify, okay, are these the things you're really doing? Is there anything on this list that you aren't doing and you think, I need to be doing that better? Is there anything on this list you think, no, that needs to be on somebody else's list? But the point is you have an opportunity to review what is your job, what are these specific responsibilities, what is your lane, if you will, because these are the things I'm going to evaluate you on as we go through the year. So let's make sure we are in full agreement, right? And that also reminds me, we should never be evaluating employees on anything other than what has been articulated, as an expectation. Well, then mid-year, I have what I call stay interviews. And so it's usually a short meeting, maybe 15 minutes, but we'll pull out that job description again. This is not an evaluative meeting. It's, hey, how are you doing? How are these things going? And how's your boss doing? And so it's just how do I reflect on, okay, no, are you in your lane? Am I in my lane? And you give them that opportunity to speak on it. And then at the end of the year, that job description turns into an evaluation form, where every one of those listed responsibilities are now are mirrored on an evaluation form with a very clear rubric of not meeting expectations, needs development, proficient, exceeding expectations, and then a little comment and evidence box. How I'm going to give you this, but actually I would ask you to direct report, self-evaluate yourself, right? Give yourself markings on all of this, and then come and let's talk about it. And at the end of the year, I give them my feedback. But that is a practice, a best practice that helps to ensure that we're in our lane, and that there's clarity of expectations.
Yeah, very good. And my understanding of a stay interview, I was just introduced to this for the first time. It may have been as recent as in the last 6 weeks or so. My understanding of that is that's the juxtaposition to an exit interview. Why wait to interview somebody until after they leave when you could interview them and find out what's happening while they're still there? Is that accurate?
Sure, right. I mean, we're all familiar with exit interviews. We try to figure out and track data of why are people leaving or why were they let go. But especially, in our current employment crisis, all the more important that we are doing all that we can to figure out how to keep people, in place and fulfilled. It is a retention practice. There's also quite a bit of data on when there are high levels of trust, there are high levels of retention. So again, it comes back to, are we intentionally assessing, developing, repairing when needed, those trust levels? And when you do that, you have a higher levels of retention significantly. People say, well, the number one reason people leave employment, and I'm sure you've seen these figures, it's because of a lack of support from their supervisor. It's not about the money. It's not the work environment. It's, I don't feel supported. And that's why people leave. So, make sure you're intentionally addressing that one. And yeah, people stay. It's not always about the money.
And you had said you do consulting work. And do you consult small to mid-sized businesses that are service-based businesses? Because I have a follow-up question, assuming, yes, I do some of those businesses.
I do. In fact, just yesterday, I have a client that has a museum, and a very small staff. I think they have 4 paid staff, and a pretty large board and volunteer group. And but it's a privately owned museum. So yes, I do that, but there's other scale as well.
Sure.
And but yes, yeah.
John and I believe that the majority of our listeners would be on the small to mid-size, probably service-based. There aren't any multi-billion-dollar product-based companies that are probably listening to our podcast. So that's why I wanted to ask you that as almost kind of a qualifying question first, before asking you, in those small to mid-sized service-based businesses, what element of the bridge do you find fails most often? Just like a bridge inspector could go to a certain state that has a certain climate and they know who the manufacturer was of it, and they know, oh, on this one, it's the rivets that always pop and it's on this side of the bridge. Like, what's predictable that's most likely to fail on this bridge that you could provide some practical advice for our listeners to on how to reinforce it to not fail?
It's hard to say which is predominant. I mean, literally every organization is unique. That's why, again, I made that statement earlier. Every school campus is unique. So, and it's true in business as well. Every situation. But I think where I would go is in the area of protecting employees. And what I mean by that is as leaders, we should be champions. We should be out in front of assessing and knowing what the needs are of our employees, what their capacity is. Very important to realize that what's going on outside of the work environment has a huge impact on what happens in the work environment. Now, it doesn't mean we have to get personal and intimate with everyone's, life, but we need to have an awareness of what's going on. Because if you've got an employee who's also caring for elderly parents that are, in hospice care or something, I mean, this has huge impact on their work and stream. I would say, excuse me, being realistic in achievables or key performance indicator. I mean, whatever measurement they're using for what they expect out of their team, is make sure those expectations are realistic. One of the things that we have seen in the education sector over the years is there's all this desire for accountability. There's always a new initiative, but there's never any intentional work on, well, what are we taking off of teachers' plates?
Yeah.
We're asking them, you go back to No Child Left Behind, and regardless of the politics of it, well-intended, right? I mean, those behind that, they wanted to make sure no child got left behind. Well-intended. What work was taken off of teachers so that they had the time to do the new work required? Well, and then this is why we have such a teacher shortage, is because we keep piling on to educators all these new accountability structures or curriculum expectations, but we don't look at the capacity of what they have to do that well. Same in the work environment, is you got to make sure you know your staff and what their capacity is, and that we're protecting, that we're not expecting them to be putting in long hours afterwards. That is not an assessment of a healthy environment. There used to be kind of that idea, if you really want to, you're really fully bought on, you're going to be working 80 hours a week. That's nonsense. You're going to burn them out. And they're going to resent it in the end. No, there might be some times when, yep, we all got to buckle in and get it done. But it can't be the norm. It can't be consistently going on. So I think I would say in those smaller ones, it's be patient. Have your goals, have your targets, but make sure you're constantly assessing the capacity of your team to reach those targets, and make sure those targets are are realistic and relevant to what you have as far as expectations.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'd go.
Dr. T, this whole conversation, one of the things I love about Trusted and the concept of this bridge is I can leave this conversation a week or two, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 months, and I'll remember this bridge concept. It kind of sticks with you. I'll remember kind of the conversation based on the bridge part. Prior to this conversation, another book that helped me in this trust conversation really had an impact on me was The Speed of Trust. It sounds very similar to Trust Edge.
Right.
And I always have that formula in my head, as trust goes up, speed goes up, costs go down. And I'm I have some finance in my background. So for me, that's a formula. I can make that work. So it's been really helpful to have that formula of that bridge structure in our head. And I love what you just said too, is be patient. Be patient. And I think entrepreneurs, and I've been a victim of this myself, is I want to go. I want to build. I want to grow. And when you do that, sometimes you have blinders on, you don't see what's going on, you miss the signals, which leads you to potentially your substructure fall apart and in different areas. So I really love the be patient. Here's one area that I just should come back to, because I'm struggling to connect the dots for myself on the difference between mission fulfillment and well-being. So for me, maybe my mission in life includes potentially well-being or fitness or health or things like that. But I'm trying to understand, your mission is to help others reach mission fulfillment and well-being. Why did you add well-being to the end of that? And what does that mean to me and our listeners specifically?
Well, I have just seen time and time again, and there's probably, a trillion books out there about organizations that have blown up because they didn't care for their people and they didn't care for themselves. How many stories are out there about individuals who were passionate about succeeding in whatever industry it is, and then they end up blowing up and crashing and burning because they weren't involved in self-care or in team care or the care of their culture and their employees. And so the reason I pair those together is because that's where longevity is, and that's where it lives, is in organizations that figure out how to create a work climate that people want to be in. It's like, oh, I can't wait to get to work today. I mean, these are the people I want to be with. This is the job I want to do. When we create those kinds of environments, whatever our missional objectives are as an organization are far more likely not only to be realized, but to be ongoing and continual. And that's why it's critical. If all we're focused on is mission fulfillment, well, we can get there. Maybe, you can push buttons. You can. I want to be careful with my illustrations, but I think of an entrepreneur who was very, very successful. In fact, if I mentioned his name, you would know his name. And I had the opportunity of working with him on one project and would never do it again. And what I saw is very, very successful in mission fulfillment, but he was burning through people so fast that no one wanted to work with him, including me. It was like, nope, I'm not going to do that again. And you, again, if I shared the story, this is an individual who is not at the peak of their success today, and their business, their work is not what it was 10, 15 years ago, and probably will not come back because nobody really wants to work with them.
Yeah. So I love the way you've connected that. And it's not just mission fulfillment then in terms of you're not only helping me attain my mission fulfillment, but you also have a passion and a mission to help me make sure, my well-being is good, but whatever I'm doing in my mission attainment, I care about the well-being of others as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is very fair. Right.
Rich, I find that to be very deep personally. Like, entrepreneurs, we're all about mission fulfillment, but then the well-being piece and taking care of yourself is so important. I know it's something we've talked to other people about as well, but I love the way you've brought that together, Dr. T. I really appreciate that. Rich, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I have a quick question on your selection of background today. I see you've got Trust Ed, you've got something that says CEO, you have Forbes on there, global. Are these clients you've worked with? What is global that seems to be on the other side? So, for those who are listeners and not seeing it, you've been intentional about your background. I'd love for you to speak to it.
Well, these are both organizations that I'm associated with, have either done work for or have written for. So I hope that, we were asking what else, what do you do at the top? You were asking well, one of the hats that I have is I'm also an opinion columnist, and my work's been actually, it was 3 times the last month I think I've been in Forbes, and so I write for Authority Magazine and eSchool News, and Global School Consulting Group though is a group that I've been associated with since its founding a few years ago. Dr. David Wells founded that group, and we have about 20 some consultants around the world. And this is a premier group of school consultants and business consultants, and I do a lot of work and projects with them, and so that's why they're on the background. CEO World Magazine, I've written for. School Right is a data delivery organization or data collection and analysis company that I work with heavily with schools. Let's see here. Willpower Consulting is a business Fortune 100, Fortune 500 company or consulting company that I'm very, very honored to be a part of. And so what else is on that?
Yeah, thank you for that.
That's basically what all those icons are behind me.
Yeah, thank you. With the obvious breadth of your experience and companies who you've worked with and written for, what would be the punctuation point to end this podcast with that you believe every entrepreneur should hear this message, whether it be doubling down on something you've already said or a new concept? What should every entrepreneur hear?
Yeah, no, this is it, Rich. If you are not intentionally assessing your trust level, developing ongoing improvement goals for yourself as a leader and for your organization or your company in its trust level with employees and with clientele, you are missing the critical work that must be done. And let me juxtapose. I can say that word. I will. Thank you very much.
Juxtapose it. Yeah.
Yes. 70% of business launches, I'm sure you know this data, and 70%, same number, 70% of improvement initiatives fail. And when you look at the 30% that are successful, what you find is they were successful in execution. So the failures were all kind of execution related issues. And when you dig below that, okay, what was it that made that execution successful? Trusted leadership. And so if you are not investing time in, again, assessing your level of trust with your employees, with your clientele, with your customers, with your vendors, right? And intentionally developing your skill set and in your corporate environment or company environment around this key element of trust, you are literally setting yourself up for failure, and you are missing a critical element of corporate and business development. And I can tell you, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies, they don't miss this trick. They spend big dollars on this, and you don't have to spend big dollars. So I'm not saying, so again, to speak to our audience today, you don't have to be spending tens of thousands of dollars on this to get it done, but you need to be doing it. And so if you aren't already connected with a coach or a consultant that can help in this area, you're missing a critical step for business success.
Thank you, Dr. T. It was a pleasure having you on today.
My joy. Thank you, guys. Great conversation.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
Where do we start on this debrief? Like, we could go in, I feel like, 20 different directions here.
I disagree.
There's only one place. Bridge.
Nope, there's only one place to go. Because you asked him specifically, and he was very prepared for the question. which is if there was one thing that you had to double down or say or do in this conversation to make sure that your message was passed on to our audience, what would it be?
Intentionally assessed trust level.
That's it. Do you intentionally assess the trust level you have with your teams? That's the only place to go. Because if you think about it, everything that we're talking about is not just about accomplishing a goal or a budget or a target or a plan. It's also the well-being of your people. It's your well-being. It's sustainability. Like, I love even the statistic he gave. 70% of improvement initiatives fail due to trust. I love that. In the M&A world, mergers and acquisitions, most M&A transactions fail because of trust. Hiring new employees and keeping them engaged in your business for a long period of time versus them leaving after 6 months is trust. Intentionally, as an entrepreneur, assessing your level of trust in the organization, I find to be a critical message here, because when he said, well, how do you erode, what's the one way leaders erode trust? You asked him, and he said it was a substructure. It was them not being authentic or having level 5 leadership, of having humility, being vulnerable, having self-awareness. And way too many times entrepreneurs run so fast, they don't have time for the assessment. They don't have time to assess their trust level or intentionally care about it. That's the big message in my mind.
I love where you're doubling down and you're making me think of, there's a measurement opportunity in so many areas of our businesses. In almost any business, you can look at number of leads, you can look at number of closes, whether it be for service or for a product. You can look at what's the average close dollar amount. Mm-hmm. You can measure how much money. You can look at ROI on marketing initiatives. Sure. And I picture a KPI, key performance indicator dashboard that you could have all this stuff on there. Where's the dashboard for trust? Where's the measurement for trust? And shouldn't that be on a KPI dashboard, just like leads, just like dollars closed, just like dollars produced? Shouldn't there be a KPI dashboard on trust?
And if there's not a daily, weekly, monthly dashboard, should you at least be intentional in trying to measure it in your organization on an annual basis?
Or we had on quarterly. Are you up or down this quarter versus last quarter on however trust is being measured?
Exactly. And Dr. T talked about assessing, right? Doing assessments and having yourself, evaluate yourself on how you think you're performing on the trust level in a bunch of different areas, and then have your team assess you and see what the gap is. That's an exercise, Rich, I did many times, both individually as a leader, 360, and as well as with my companies, with one of our guests, Ruth Lund from the Legacy Center.
Yes.
And we would go through and assess myself, and the team would assess my behaviors in terms of the trust level, and then the organization would. And what she would measure in her assessments was entropy. What is the level of entropy that exists in the organization? And entropy was kind of defined as, when there was limiting factors that were holding the organization back from the relationships and trust and behaviors that existed in the organization. And what we would do on an annual basis, we'd measure the level of entropy. So entropy, if it was at a 15% entropy in the organization, then we tried to drive it all the way down, right? Drive it down to 2, 3, 4% entropy in the organization. So there are tools that will assess this. I'm sure Dr. T has his tools as well that seem very, very similar. I think that needs to be done at least on an annual basis. I don't know if it needs to be done weekly or monthly on a dashboard KPI. But there's also another thing that he talked about here that I don't think is talked about enough. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go to the CEOs I work with and ask them if they should be implementing this right now. It is a big takeaway from this, although it was a small section of our conversation: stay interviews.
Mm-hmm.
In this great resignation period where employees are leaving jobs and it's hard to hire people, it's hard to retrain what you have, to have a 15-minute, he said, 15-minute conversation to ask you 3 questions. Are you staying in your lane? How are you doing versus these jobs? The job you're expecting, is this what you're doing? Those kinds of things. How are you feeling? And how's your boss doing? I don't know if you caught that one. That one was interesting to me, right? Because you are the boss asking them, how am I doing? Am I supporting you properly? Are you happy? Is there things I should be doing to lead you better? Is there any concerns you may have about our relationship? Asking somebody in an open environment in 15 minutes in a one-on-one, mid-year, quarterly, whatever, that's powerful. If you're an employee and your boss is saying, Rich, what can I be doing better to develop my relationship with you? Is there anything I could be doing to motivate you, lead you? Is there anything I did that maybe was off base? Please give me the feedback. And then take that feedback with authenticity. That's powerful. I don't know if you need a dashboard to have those conversations, but seldomly do we have them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll just for a moment take a pit stop on the other side of the Great Resignation that people typically think. What I mean by that is so many entrepreneurs that I talk to, the conversation is very similar to the way that you just introduced it. The Great Resignation, our people are leaving. We need to create a better culture. We have to retain our good people. I do want to encourage our entrepreneurs who are listeners to remember the Great Resignation means people are leaving other companies too. This is the time to go recruit. This is a time to go get really good people because people are leaving other companies.
And so how are you going to get them, Rich?
Trust. That's what we got from today, right?
Exactly.
But it's like, don't focus 100% of the effort. In all honesty, maybe 80% of the effort, maybe even 90%, on creating a culture where people stay and they're magnetically attracted to come into it. But you've got to reserve a little bit where you're still in the always be recruiting mode because good people are leaving other companies.
Yeah, certainly the fondest memory I've ever had of the best company culture.
Was I involved in it? The fondest?
No.
Darn.
You're in most of my best memories, but not this one.
All right.
So in the best company culture that I ever experienced, almost every hire that we were bringing on board was a warm network referral. Almost every single one. We never had to post an ad and bring somebody in from the outside. And that just talks to the magic of when your people are going out to happy hour on Friday afternoon and they're talking to people at the bar going, you should work for this company. It's awesome, right? The culture's great. The people are great. People trust each other. There's a no asshole rule, all those kinds of things. You attract people because those places are hard to find in today's world, right? So I love that. The other piece that really struck with me in this conversation, and it was towards the end that he mentioned it, is be patient. Be patient. Trust is not built overnight. You putting posters on a wall and saying, this is what we stand for, kind of, okay, pass the first test, but they're going to be watching you, not just this week or next week, but next month, 2 months from now, when you're somewhere and you don't even know that they're there watching you. Like, you got to be patient and build that trust over a long period of time and be patient to let it kind of form itself. That's something that I think entrepreneurs have a struggle with. I did.
I wish I would have asked Dr. T on this when you talk about be patient. I think there's a very close connection between patience and loyalty. And I think one thing that we need to remember as employers of others is loyalty begets loyalty. All of our people have a life outside of their work, and every person has ups and downs in that life outside of work. And Dr. T talked about it on this podcast, where people's outside of work life influences their inside of work life. And I think to be loyal and patient with our people when they're experiencing things in their life that are impacting their work, I think loyalty begets loyalty. And there's an element of patience to that.
Yeah. Now I'm confused because I was so sure that there was one nugget that recapped everything. And it was, do you intentionally assess your trust level? And now I'm not so sure based on what you just said, because the one thing he said very early on in the conversation with a lot of passion and heart was life is about relationships.
Yes.
I don't know how you can have trust if you don't have a deep relationship. Loyalty begets loyalty. Trust. It's all part of that same conversation. Life is about relationships. Are you taking care of those relationships, Or are you so mission oriented and goal oriented that the well-being of yourself and others doesn't matter? It's all about getting to the mighty destination. Life is about relationships. That to me, everything we keep talking about, and you said it very well, like there's so many nuggets here. We can keep talking for hours. And there's so much more that I love about what he delivered in terms of the formula of the bridge and everything that comes along with the bridge and the part it plays in helping you get from point A to point B.